How would your childhood, teenage years, and career change if society saw being an artist as a real career? AKA, if artists made more money off of their work because being an artist would be more of a prestigious career. And this person feels compelled to let us know they don't personally think it's not a prestigious career. So we're going to tackle that as we switch into talking about work and other people's work, and we're going to talk about creative control today. You don't know like how weird and proud I get of myself when I make a nice presentation, and I'm like, no matter what happens, it's got like an intermission. That's pretty cool. I'm happy with that. It's got a nice labeling system. Okay, so we're going to talk about the new Atmosphere record. We're going to talk about the career of legendary East Coast skateboarder Ryan Hickey, and we're going to talk about creative control. So, Ryan Hickey. Ryan Hickey was a New York skateboarder in the 90s who skated for a bunch of really influential companies. He skated for Stereo, which was Jason Lee of My Name is Earl's company. Who else did he skate for? He was the first pro on Zoo York. Probably everybody's at least mildly familiar with Zoo York as an institution. He skated for a couple other really famous New York and California-based companies. Ryan Hickey is legendary because somehow he managed to have this super long career while putting out a minute of footage. So skateboarding is built on video parts. If you don't put out video parts, you pretty much don't have a career because you're not relevant to the market because no one knows what you do or what you see, and you don't make them excited, and they don't buy boards with your name on it or your sponsor's name on it. So that's like the primary kind of marketing thing for a skateboarder. Ryan Hickey somehow managed to put out no footage for his career, like literally a minute, and somehow that kept him in business. On the other hand, he delivered tons of great photos for ads. So that actually sustained his career in a kind of counterintuitive way. So there's a great interview recently with Ryan Hickey. And he talks about his career. And what comes across is that he's an incredibly difficult, opinionated purist about his skateboarding. He didn't film because he felt it was artificial, that there was something about having to have someone follow him around and schedule, like, okay, let's meet at this set of stairs, and I'll try this trick and this trick and this trick, and he'd rather hang out with photographers who were already going to be skating where they could take a break, and he could be like, here, get a photo of a backsmith for me. And then that's how he would work. So he was fully okay with photography, but he hated filming for whatever reason. So he just didn't do it. And eventually that tanked his career because all his sponsors were like, no one actually knows what it looks like when you skateboard. It's been 6 years since you put out footage. So he was fired from everybody and never really came back from it because he never made the compromise of go out to California more, where all the companies and all the photographers and all the video makers are, and get more footage out in the world, or film a lot in New York and send your footage to California to your sponsors so that people know who you are. Basically, he refused to cede any level of creative control whatsoever, to the point where you read the interview with him, and he knows that he's the one responsible for destroying his career. He's fully cognizant of the fact that he is a legend. He's aware of the fact that in skateboarding, he's this dude who is a legend, and that he destroyed his own career, and that he kind of goes like, yeah, maybe I could have gone out to California more, but he doesn't say it in a way where you believe that he ever would have. It's really clear that he was like, that he knows he's supposed to say that he's apologetic and that he should have been out in California more and he should have filmed more, but you don't believe it for a minute. It's really clear that he was like, no, I would much rather be doing construction now than working on other people's schedules and timelines about essentially my art. Skateboarding is his art, right? It's his creative outlet, and he refused to compromise it in any way, shape, or form. I used to read interviews like this with people all the time, like skateboarders, musicians, artists, all these people who had a career in the thing where you think like dream job. Like all he has to do is have someone film him doing this trick, and he gets to keep being pro, but he refuses to do it. And you think about musicians that just refuse to tour anymore, and you're like, well, touring just seems like maybe an unnecessary, like a unfortunate side effect of having to be a working musician, but there's like, nope, done, it sucks. I'd rather be a high school teacher. So there's all these people that leave what we think are dream jobs or what look like dream jobs to me. Skateboarder, rapper, famous graphic designer or whatever, those all look like dream jobs to me. And then there's all these people that abandon them. And essentially they abandon them because they can't hack destroying the purity of the activity, which is something I realized like I can relate to more than I thought. And it's going to connect to the other question over here, the one about how would your childhood or teenage years or career change if society saw being an artist as a real career? If you're Ryan Hickey, nothing changes. Because even when there was a chance to get money for the thing, you refused to compromise. I'm not saying that's bad at all, and I'm not saying it's noble. I'm saying it's a personal decision about what you're willing to tolerate. So a lot of people would much rather have a jobby job and do their art for fun with no attachments, no expectations from other people, and keep it as pure as is humanly possible, whereas other people are happy to compromise on every front possible because the dream of being a musician is worth it, and it's an individual question. So I want to talk about, I designed the new Atmosphere record, which I would think is probably the biggest project I've ever worked on. I assume when it comes out, it will be on like the Billboard Top 200, and it will be fairly widely seen. First, we have to talk about informational interviews. These are the best thing ever. So informational interview is like you want to work somewhere, and you go and talk to them kind of with no expectations. You just want to find out what they do, find out about the process, find out how they hire people and what kind of people they hire, and usually show some work. So I think in 2010, March of 2010, I was freaking out about getting money. I had a very young child, like 5 months old, and I was like, holy shit, I need money. My life is about to end. And so I went to Rhymesayers, the company sort of co-owned by members of Atmosphere that puts out all their records, and it's, indie hip-hop juggernaut or whatever, and showed them some work and, talked with them for a while. It was a, positive conversation, but nothing came out of it. 6 years later to the week, I get an email asking if I'm interested in working on a project with them. Because the person that I had the informational interview, I had a copy of my book that I'd left there 6 years before. It's been sitting around, and they needed someone to work on the Atmosphere record, and he said, oh, this guy came in, seemed really good. I think that this project would work for him. So half a decade of waiting for an opportunity, not waiting, but it showed up all because of an informational interview. So do informational interviews with the type of people you want to work with and the type of people you want to meet. That's extremely random and weird. Okay, so I'm going to give some context to this. The way that Atmosphere work is they work with a photographer, Dan Monick, to come up with a visual concept of the record. So they talk about the themes of the record. So their last record, Southsiders, was essentially about the idea of winter in South Minneapolis. Kind of middle class melange of urban and neighborhood and all kinds of different stuff, and that's what it's about. This record is essentially about summer in Minnesota. So it's called Fishing Blues. And so what happened is when I came in, they had the photography, they had an idea about how it would be structured, and essentially what they needed was someone who could figure out how pieces interacted with each other and what the type should look like. So basically, no creative control, which was awesome, and the only reason I could do the project, because it was supposed to be done in 2 weeks, and I have a full-time job, and I was teaching 2 nights a week. So any other thing, if they'd said, we have no idea what we're going to do, but you need to do it in 2 weeks, if I didn't have a job, I could totally do that. But I only have so many hours a day, so having them say, we've got all these pieces figured out, can you just figure out how it works, what the type looks like, and lay that stuff out? Can you do that? And I was like, yes, you can totally do that. I'm actually very excited to do that because when you get a bunch of beautiful photography and the only thing you have to do is not fuck it up, that is a really nice position to be in. So they said it was a summer record, so I was thinking about 70s folk and rock records. So I started doing a search for kind of 70s folk and rock records. These kind of soft fonts or like really clean lines of all caps type. A lot of nice stuff in here. And then I took the artwork that they had and started laying it out. So we did one that was like this kind of soft light, this like soft 70s font, some Helvetica light. And these are really rough. Like they don't have a barcode, they don't have a logo or anything, because they just want to figure out if there's one that works for them. So this was another one inspired by no fishing signs. And then another one of these soft, bulbous-looking fonts. And the idea at this point was that all of this stuff would be a spot varnish, so it wouldn't be color. It would just be transparent and glossy, so that like in one light you wouldn't see the type, and then you'd flip it and be like, whew, atmosphere. This one was called Big Maple because the font is called Maple, and it's designed by local designers. Oh, and then started to explore what the information level might look at. One inspired by that's kind of Joni Mitchell records or whatever. So I sent that to them. I didn't do like a real presentation. They just looked through it, read the descriptions. They probably didn't even read the descriptions because no one ever does. And they're probably like, oh, that one. So then they were really into the Big Maple one and wanted to explore different weights of it and figure out how it would work more. So the way this works is this a triple gatefold record. So right-hand side's the cover, middle is the back cover, and then this thing folds inside. So that when you open it up, you would see that photo. And like pulling this type kind of from the sand over here. And then we did 2 weights of it because they were like, we don't know if it's too heavy, can you do a lighter version of it? Because I've done so much stuff and I'm not super invested in the process, it's really easy to be like, yeah, I can do a lighter weight. I tried to get myself credited as cover mechanic instead of graphic designer, but they changed it. And then they had an idea for the interior, but it was a little crazy. These are the lyrics from start to finish running across the whole thing. And I was like, oh man. So I was like, can we put the credits over this photo? And they said, no, please don't do that. So she sent that to them, and then they meet and they have conversations. And they send an email back and they say, hey, there's that Joni Mitchell record in the very first thing you sent. Could you quickly do a version that uses that kind of type? So this like super light, tightly packed Helvetica. And I was like, yeah, that would be beautiful. I would be happy to do that. So then we do that. And then we look at what this looks like in Helvetica, and you can't tell any difference at this view. And they come back and they say, okay, don't do the Helvetica. But we're not going to do a spot varnish. We're going to do more of like, we think it should just be ink. Can you figure out what color it is? And like a kind of a bluish gray. And can you move it up out of the trees? So then we do that. And then like, can you do the back with just center type? Yes. And then, so the way this record works, and it's kind of hard to explain, but if you think about like a record package, so records slide in. So they're actually going to print inside of here. So this is the pattern that's going to be inside, so that like when you opened it up to pull the record out, you'd look and see this cool fishing lure pattern. And then the other thing is like this idea they stole from the Beastie Boys record Paul's Boutique. So if you've ever seen Paul's Boutique, it's got this super long lyric sheet. It's one line from start to finish. There's no differences between songs. You have to be a lunatic and look for like the Eggman or whatever. And then it had illustrations of fish. So they thought like this is a nice kind of homage to include on a record that's already about summertime activities. So we started making these illustrations of fish and figuring out how to fit all these credits in here. And I think they made me make it all caps. And I was like, it's going to be so hard to read all caps. But that's what we did. And it's acceptable. And it fit perfectly. Very difficultly. So I send it to them. This is like last little tweaks, like figuring out what the spine looks like. One thing that's really sad is they opened up the leading between Atmosphere and Fishing Blues. It's not as tight, and I think it should stay that way, but I can live with it. And then we finish that pattern. And then I must have made some tweaks in here, so you can kind of see like how the lures bleed through. And then these are the actual record labels. And then one thing that's sort of missing from this, but I don't think it really matters, so every record comes in a sleeve, and that sleeve has more photography. So if you get this record, it's just this explosion of photography, because there's like giant photos everywhere, and it's really beautiful. But the sleeves were just like, it's just a big-ass photo. It's not like, I didn't have to do anything. I just had to like put the right photo in the right spot. So I'm sort of skipping that. So let's talk communication problems with clients. So I have an issue. This record's supposed to take 2 weeks. It ends up taking 8 weeks. So it's dragging out. So when I committed to it, and this is not, it's not really a diss to them, but like they had a certain timeline because vinyl takes a while to make. So like we absolutely need this in 2 weeks. But what happens with all clients is once they're making the thing, their deadlines start to vanish because all of a sudden they want it to be perfect, which is fine and reasonable. But I should have known it wouldn't take 2 weeks. So in my mind, I was going to work like a psychopath for 2 weeks, and then boom, done. Awesome. But instead, it was like it kept coming back, and all of a sudden, like I have other stuff going on. My work is like heating up, and all of a sudden I need to be doing all these 12-hour days at my normal job, and then there's this thing sitting here. And then on top of that, they're doing a music festival. There's delays with the pressing plant, so they're running into issues. So our communication broke down, not in a typically... Nobody was like ignoring each other, but everyone's life got super hectic because it was stretching out for too long. So it ended up being like they took the art and they would make changes based on their own conversations because it was easier just to change it than to have a conversation and communicate those changes to me, which is fine. I'm not offended by it because I was also like all of a sudden working on this big launch at work, and it's like, shit, I got to work for 12 hours today, and then I got to go home and design a CD. So they ended up doing more pieces. But then once we did the final stuff, I ended up designing some extra pieces because yeah, that's what you do. You always throw some stuff in for free, like some bonus materials, because you want it to be like, oh, I like working with that person. Even if like there was like, oh, this thing kind of fell apart a little bit, but they were still putting in effort on our stuff and still thinking about our project. So we designed like some posters, or I designed. I would say we, but some T-shirt ideas, some more T-shirt ideas. Because that photography was beautiful. I really wanted a shirt with just like this giant wheat field on it. And that is that. And then they took that art and they made the like a CD and a cassette package and other stuff like that.
Did you like get to hear any of the album?
Mm-mm. I didn't listen to it at all, which was really funny. Reading the lyrics, I could fully hear what they would sound like, which was kind of interesting. But no, it was weird. I didn't ask because they had the concept so buttoned up. It was like, why? If they're not offering, it leads me to believe they don't want me to hear it for some reason. Like maybe they're trying to keep it under wraps or keep it from leaking. So they just told me what the record was about, and I was like, all right, cool, sounds good. And they had this beautiful photography. I'm going to show a couple of examples of other stuff that has no creative control, or seemingly doesn't. So this is Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures record. Even if you're not familiar with Joy Division or this record, you've seen that graphic, right? I feel like it's got to be nearly unanimous that you've seen that or you've seen a riff of it or like a rip-off of it. So Peter Saville, this is his first album cover design. And Peter Saville is a co-owner of Factory Records, Joy Division's label. He's probably really young, 23, 24, something like that. And Joy Division come to him when it's time to do the record with a manila envelope just filled with stuff. So there's this image, which I can't remember the name of it, but it's basically the death of a star. It's like these pulsars from space. And then there's a photograph in it. I don't remember if there's anything else. I think that's it. And they're like, this is the artwork. And he's like, okay, cool. Now, Peter Saville is synonymous with this artwork. No one goes, oh, who was the dude that constructed the Joy Division cover based on their artwork? Everyone just goes like, Peter Saville, that's his thing. So he doesn't have creative control, but then what he does without creative control is make a super iconic record cover by doing some things that the band probably wasn't expecting. So that thing is really small on that cover with no type whatsoever. If you've ever seen a bootleg version of a Joy Division record where they make that thing big and fill up the whole surface, it looks like crap. It does not look good. When it looks good is when it's this weird, tight, mysterious unit in the middle. I've seen these dumb tattoos of people that have that like tattooed all up their back, and it's like, oh, you missed the point. Your tattoo should be that big. It would look sick if it was that big, but you just have this big, clunky, weird mess of lines. So Saville took that, made it super small, and made this mysterious, weird thing. And then he made everything throughout the record echo that. And he talks about the reason there's no type on the cover is where the hell would you put the type? If you put it across the top and bottom, you destroy the tension in the middle. If you put it directly above and below the image, you again destroy the impact of the image. Anywhere you put type on this destroys the image. And again, look at a dumb Joy Division shirt that's got that graphic this big, Joy Division across the top, Unknown Pleasures across the bottom. It does not have the visual power that this has. And then this is the other piece he has. So he then creates this little simple narrative. Black exterior, white interior with this, I believe it's a Gordon Parks photo that he didn't know was famous and was actually mad at them later that they gave him a famous photo, which is kind of funny. And then, do I have the type in here? Oh, I don't have the type. And then if you see it, the back cover is basically the same proportions, and it's this little beautiful thing. It says Joy Division, a rule line, Unknown Pleasures. And when you flip this thing over, the interior sleeve, basically same dimensions, it's got the track listing. This beautiful, precise, methodical piece of graphic design that technically he didn't have creative control on. They didn't say oh, the record is about this. Go give us your best ideas. They said, here's the artwork, figure it out. And in the process of his unique take on it and giving a shit, he makes an iconic record. He so easily could have been oh, sucks. I don't get creative control. I don't get to come up with an idea. Let's blow this thing up huge. Let's just throw Joy Division across the top and bottom, and then it'll be done. A Joy Division record would still be a famous record one way or another. But a huge part of it being an iconic record is because of those decisions that he made. And you'll see interviews there's an interview with Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth, who bought this record not knowing what it was. He's flipping through bins and sees this record with nothing on it and was what the hell is this? And bought it on principle. So all his weird decisions, make the artwork small, make the type small, don't put type on the cover, that's the stuff that led to it being an iconic record. It would still be great one way or another. And I think, and basically no creative control other than to make those decisions about what to do with the pieces. This is work by, so these are two records by Blue Tip. Blue Tip was a band out of DC. Jason Farrell of the sort of legendary DC hardcore band Swizz was the singer-guitarist. And these are records he designed for Blue Tip. So when he did Blue Tip records, he had total creative control. And he went with this sort of aesthetic. He had this kind of weird fantasy of 50s car and refrigerator and industrial graphics. That was kind of the thing he was interested in, was this version of it he had built up in his head. And he'd always use beautiful metallic inks. This is all gold. These are two metallic inks, a blue and a green one. Great kind of 50s industrial design sort of colors. I remember reading an interview with Jason Farrell, and they asked him about designing records. So he has a dream job. At this point, he's a legendary graphic designer for Discord Records out of DC, which is the home of Minor Threat and Fugazi and Ian MacKaye and Rites of Spring and Slant Six and Riot Girl, all this shit. His name is attached to all these records, and they're asking about creative control, and he says, I hate creative control. I do not want creative control. I don't want to be forced to come up with my ideas for your stuff. And so, if you ever see, these are more Blue Tip records. So he would do really great stuff with layering. So if you ever see a Fugazi record, Jason Farrell's credited as the designer on most Fugazi records, but he doesn't credit himself. It always says concept Fugazi with Jem Cohen, the filmmaker, and then it says cover mechanic Jason Farrell. So that's what he would do for most of the records, is that he wanted the band to have an idea, and then he would just put cover mechanic. That he actually didn't want to come up with ideas. He wanted them to know what they wanted, and then his job was to do the most awesome version of that possible. I remember reading that, and I couldn't relate to it at all. You have this dream job. You get to work with legendary DC punk and hardcore and indie rock bands. You work with frickin' Ian MacKaye. You design Fugazi records. Why wouldn't you want creative control? But for him, his sort of belief was, and I don't actually believe this, but I understand where he's coming from, it's hard enough coming up with ideas for himself. He doesn't want to waste his ideas on other people. I think there's something interesting about understanding your own creativity to that extent. Of understanding, again, like Ryan Hickey, what are you willing to tolerate and not tolerate? Because Jason Farrell could probably be, in general, a very famous record cover designer, but he's basically spent his life avoiding it, and it's basically a maintenance thing. He can make some money doing it, so he does it, but basically he avoids it and tries to work as a cinematographer on commercials and whatnot. He does sort of everything to avoid being a graphic designer, which, not because he doesn't like it, but he likes it so much that he doesn't want anyone screwing it up and wasting his time. I think there's something really beautiful about that. So like this is another Fugazi record, credited as cover mechanic, which is Shudder to Think record. And so he's worked on all these sort of legendary records, and to him they're like, the best scenario is, don't ask me what I think. Just let me like pick the fonts and kind of sort out the layout in general, but come up with a halfway decent idea. And so I'm thinking about this because like I get this call from rhyme sayers and I don't have creative control, and I'm basically like, yes, I'll do it. That sounds awesome. I don't want creative control. Like, I don't need more stress in my life. If you're trusting me just to pick the fonts and figure out how the type works, that's actually like a dream. That's like being hired to do one thing really well. Like, it's like being hired to come in and do a guest verse on someone's record. Like, don't produce the whole record. Just come in and do a really good guest verse. I'm suspecting that that's why a lot of rap records are terrible, but like Gunplay comes in, he does a verse on a Rick Ross song. It's like the greatest thing in the world, and then Gunplay makes a record with creative control, and it's total awful garbage, in my opinion. I think that, like, I've realized that for me, like, I don't want creative control on other people's stuff. If money exchanges hands, you don't have creative control, you have permission. Because the minute they don't want you to have creative control anymore, you don't have it. And you either have to quit or get fired. But like creative control is a temporary illusion, I think. It's been very helpful for me to understand, oh, yeah, I don't need that, actually. If I want creative control, I will do things that don't involve money. So I will make photos, and I will make videos, and I will do personal design projects that have no expectations on the rest of the world. But otherwise, yeah, like I've never actually had creative control on any project. It's always been a temporary agreement. We're letting you do this, even when they tell you you have creative control. And maybe that sounds cynical, but on the other hand, it'd be really helpful not to say destroy your skateboarding career because you don't understand your own methodology and your own way of thinking. So like all day long, I have a job with no creative control. And I'm fully happy with that because that doesn't ruin graphic design for me. A lot of people, the way they do graphic design, they do it opposite of how I do it. They need graphic design to be an area of massive creativity and creative control and freedom. But they want it to be a full-time job. I don't ever want to do that again. I hated all the compromise. I hated like having a jobby job where creative directors could get in the way of an idea and keep it from flourishing. All of that is really disappointing and shitty. For other people, that's just the way it goes, and it's cool. It makes sense that the creative director shoots down your ideas. It's never occurred to me until fairly recently that I have always been a massive egomaniac about my work. I can show you any project I've ever done. I'm convinced that the version before the client changed it, before the creative director changed it, before the teacher changed it, was the right one. Now, or one of the right ones. It doesn't mean the end result wasn't still good, but I'm sure of my instincts and my opinions. So creative control ends up being this weird thing where like I'm like Ryan Hickey. Like most people make a living off graphic design and they compromise. I find the compromise such a nightmare that I'd rather have a job related to graphic design, but where you can't actually kind of get in my way. I don't know. It's a weird thing, but very helpful to be aware of, because then it's like, I always thought that I was sabotaging my career by shit I would refuse to do, which I was, but I'd feel really bad about it. I'd feel bad that I wouldn't just try to get any old client to work for, and I needed my clients to be the kind of stuff I wanted to do. But it's just like I happen to have, for whatever reason, a super purist version of the activity when I do it. When other people do it, I think however they want to do it is cool. Make all the compromises in the world. If you're happy and you enjoy doing that work, then awesome. I get so weird about, like, will somebody be like, I know this lawyer that needs like some work, and I'm like, no, that doesn't sound good. Like, I don't even listen to it. I just think like, lawyer, nope, done. And other people are like, okay, cool, let's hear them out. Or other people are like, new client, no matter what, it's gonna be awesome. I think if you understand what stuff gets in your way, it's so helpful for making decisions about what you're gonna do. It doesn't mean get super tied up into some identity. It took me 15 years to figure out some of this stuff. But there were always clues about it, and I probably could have saved myself a lot of headaches by just realizing like, oh, I treat this like art, and when money is involved, it tends to screw it up. So if I can do it in a less artistic way, designing the Atmosphere record, not artistic. Just not, right? They came up with the idea. I have a craft-based skill to inject. And it turns out that's awesome. It's like, that is so great. I could do 100 versions of that cover for them and be totally happy. I don't know if it would be as great to sit down and be like, all right, you say the record is about summer, I'm gonna go figure it out. Because like, it won't be about what I think summer's about. It's gonna be about what do I think summer's about that you will let me make for you. And for me, that's shitty. For other people, it's cool and invigorating, and understanding that will help you have at least a more gratifying career, so that you can figure out, what stuff for you is non-negotiable and what stuff is totally open to change, and you can get through things a little bit better. And that if you can start to develop that self-awareness, don't become rigid and crazy, but just look for clues. Look for the things that rub you the wrong way, and then think, am I being a baby about this? Or do I have just a conviction about this? I used to think I was a baby about the creative control stuff and about not wanting to compromise. It turns out I have a conviction about it, and at this point, I'm not changing. Like, I'm 40. I've definitely been the same person on this level since I was 18. I'm not suddenly going to be super amenable to compromise. And I will be able to make much better decisions about what I will and won't do going forward with that awareness. So, let's see, we'll end it on 2 photos of trash.